Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Ireland Chapter of PMI, to the launch of our PMO Community of Practice. We have a packed agenda for today's launch, as well as an opportunity for you to ask questions of our panelists towards the end. So I'll hand over now to the President of the Ireland Chapter of the PMI, Jackie Glynn. Thank you, Jackie.
Good morning, everybody. Just give me a moment while I bring up my screen. You're very welcome this morning on this very blustery windswept morning. Thank you very much for turning out this morning. We're going to talk this morning, and we're officially launching what we're calling the Ireland Chapter of PMI Community of Practice. And let me give you a little bit of background to what it is. So I took over as president in January 2020. I'm coming to the last month of my term of office. And as one of the ideas, or I suppose objectives as part of that term of office was, I have a passion for PMOs and what they can enable in organizations. And with Terence, we had an idea that we'd do this. Now, of course, life turned a little bit differently for us all in the last couple of years. So we're finally getting to do this in the last month of my presidency, which I'm delighted with. And I'm delighted with all the support from the speakers this morning to make this happen. So let me give you a little bit of background so I can introduce the panel this morning. So in 2017, the Ireland Chapter of PMI launched the National Awards, and that was to promote and recognise the role of project managers in Ireland, because as we all know, we all focus on getting things done, and then we get on to the next project and there's little recognition. So this was about giving that industry recognition. And one of the award categories as part of the National Awards has always been the PMO of the Year. And all of these awards are judged independently by a group of industry experts. And we have independent governance oversight provided by Matheson. So very structured, independent, judging process for these awards. In 2021, we had to run the awards virtually, and we had over 190 people in attendance. And in 2021, the finalists for the National Awards PMO of the Year were 4 companies: Arvia, Icon, Medtronic, and the Revenue Commissioners. And this is a great representation across industry sectors of all different types of PMOs and what they were doing for their organizations. The judging panel considered all of them excellent PMOs and merited considerable reflection by the judging panel. Each PMO provided different aspects of services and functions in the different sectors they were in. But however, this kind of surfaced a number of similar themes right across them, which made them stand out as agenda setting, future orientated PMOs. And the P in PMO stood for project, program, and portfolio. And a number of the PMOs in the finalists provided services covering 2 of these domains, with one providing services for all 3 Ps. So given all of that we have a national awards and a PMO of the year, really the question we want to ask if you're in the PMO space or you want to get into the PMO space is what you need to consider. And as a practitioner myself, I've gone through this process, and I've been very lucky to have mentors and contacts through Terence over the years. Which is why, it is emboldened on us to put a community and practice in place. So what you consider when you're starting your PMO is a project, program, or portfolio. And then the other consideration to consider is if you're setting it up from scratch and it's new to the organization, it is in itself a transformational change for the organization. So how do I go about doing that? Then the other things that I might look at is what kind of model, like what level of maturity, what am I aiming for? And there's all sorts of different models here, from the PMO competency continuum to the 5 levels of maturity, from OPM3 and OCB to the PMI supporting control and directive PMO to the Gartner, activist centralized delivery and compliance PMO. So if you're new to this space, it can be very challenging to understand where do I begin and where do I start from. Then in consideration, you also have the whole point of view of what's the requirement I'm trying to deliver against. And basically, the tool set you might look at once you define that requirement is, are you looking at execution level PPM tools, which are below the line tools, which are all around project and resource management communication, and the typical RAG status and that we come to know and love from a PMO perspective? Or are you also considering project portfolio, which is all about above the line tools supporting that strategic planning focused on value, risks and benefits and executing strategies from strategy to execution. And business sponsors need this to create project related decision frameworks around priorities, etc. And then trying to plan the delivery of these project investments and tracking those investments. So then when I look at my tool set, if I spend time on Google, I'll just get awash with opportunities and different people telling me you can do portfolio, you can do project, you can do program. So the options are endless when you look at the types of PMOs, what the requirement is and what the tool set. And this can all be very daunting if you're new to this space, or if you're in the space where you've had a PMO and you want to evolve it to a different level. So that is why we decided that we would set up and launch this PMO Community of Practice this morning. And the objective of it is really to provide that forum for PMO practitioners. So PMO practitioners are defined by people who enable, support and drive change in organizations. We want to be able to create a space where knowledge can be shared. And we want to welcome membership from across the whole PMO community, from leaders, sponsors, practitioners, or people who are interested in getting into the PMO space. The scope of this community of practice is that it'll be based in Ireland. We want to learn how to leverage PMOs to improve project delivery and share ideas. And we also want to be able to look at benefits, practices, tools, what looks good for one organization. And ultimately, the goal is to how to improve PMOs so we can add value to your organization. So from a chapter perspective, my commitment in leading this out in the next year with Terence is around a number of key deliverables. We will commit to having at least 6, if not 9, virtual / in-person events throughout the year of 2022, pending government guidelines and the COVID situation. We would hope to have the other national awards, PMO of the Year finalists present their presentations throughout this, which we hope will share the knowledge. We also would like to bring in some additional international leaders from the PMO community who have won PMO Global Awards to share their insight and knowledge. And ultimately, we have a couple of ideas around what would make sense, but we obviously want to engage with the community itself to understand what topics would be of interest to you. And some of the ones that we think may be of interest, but when we reach out to you, you can tell us, is it tools for PMOs? Is it benchmarking for PMOs, PMO certification, benefits realization, or anything else that you want to talk about in relation to moving your PMO forward? So today is a really good day for the chapter. We're launching this PMO Community of Practice, and I'm delighted to be able to announce that Auxilion have committed to sponsor this Community of Practice for the next 12 months, which is fantastic. So thank you very much, Terence and Sean and the team. This morning, what we're going to do for this launch is we're going to have 2 other people talk about PMOs this morning. The first person is Cleo O Byrne, who is the head of PMO in the Department of Revenue, and Revenue were nominated the PMO award winner in the national awards this year. And the second element of discussion this morning will be led by Terence O'Donnell and Professor Joe Peppard. And really what they took was our 4 finalists, and they did a fascinating case study on PMO leadership in Ireland, and they're willing to share that with us this morning. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over the screen to Cleo O Byrne, and you're very welcome this morning, Cleo. Hope your presentation goes well.
Thanks very much, Jackie. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully...
Thanks, Cleo. And while Cleo's doing that, everyone, just to remind you, and I might pop it up on screen really quickly, we've asked you just one question this morning because we want to focus on our speakers and the launch. Are you directly involved in a PMO? And I think Terence, Cleo and Jackie, this will be interesting for all of you. Joe, I'm not involved in a PMO, 15%. I work in a PMO, 45%, so almost half of our audience work in a PMO, and 40% lead a PMO. So I think you definitely have the target audience here this morning. So thank you for joining in. Just a reminder for everyone, there is an opportunity towards the end for a Q&A with our panelists. So I'll be talking to you in the comments and collecting any questions that you have. So let me know in the chat. I'll keep an eye on them and we'll post them to our panel later on. So there you go, Cleo. Thank you.
Oh, thanks very much, Katrina. So good morning, everyone. My name is Cleo O Byrne. I'm a Principal Officer in the Office of the Revenue Commissioners. I lead our Programme Management Office, which is based in our ICT and Logistics division. And this year we were delighted and honoured to be the recipient of the PMI PMO of the Year award. I'd like to commend the PMI for establishing this PMO community of practice. I think it will be of great value to all of us working in PMOs and will provide us with a network to share our experiences and learn from each other. I suppose reaching out to PMOs to learn or to support is something that we've always sought to do in revenue. I'm here today to give you a sense of our PMO, but I think it's important to highlight that we're always evolving and reviewing our ways of working. We would never regard ourselves as the finished product, and we're always challenging ourselves to do better. I suppose the context and the environment in which we're operating is continuously changing, and it's important that we as a PMO evolve to meet the needs of the business and to ensure that we're adding value in essence. So today, the agenda for my presentation will hopefully give you insights into the following: the context and the background of the PMO in revenue, how we determine what projects and programs of work to do and how these are prioritised, the outcomes and the benefits of the PMO in revenue, how, as our PMO has matured, we have recognised and taken the opportunities to drive change at an organisational level. And then I hope to wrap up and talk about some of the challenges we faced, the lessons we've learned, and I suppose that continuous drive to evolve and improve, and touch upon some of the things that we're going to look at next. So to give you a sense of the PMO context in revenue, I think it's important to start first with revenue's mission. So revenue's mission is to serve the community by fairly and efficiently collecting taxes and duties and implementing customs controls. And the mission statement of our ICT strategy is to enable revenue to achieve its strategic business goals through the provision of secure, reliable, and quality ICT services, and to help drive the transformation of revenue business processes. And in a sense, the role of the PMO is to support the delivery of these business goals. And at the outset, that starts with the basics of planning, reporting, supporting the development of business cases that align with organizational strategy. Before, as I suppose we mature, we're able to provide greater focus on benefits, change management, and quality. So the PMO in revenue was established as part of revenue's corporate governance structures in 2006 within the ICT and Logistics division. So at the time, there was considerable focus on project management and particularly projects that had significant ICT investment. Revenue had just delivered a substantial PAYE redesign project, and although the project was a success, I suppose it was recognised as part of the review that its success was due to a number of key individuals getting that project over the line. During the project, it was difficult to objectively assess how we were progressing, where exactly we were. And really, I suppose as part of that, we identified a need to incorporate more structure into our projects. So while there were governance procedures in place, the initial focus of the PMO then was to establish a solid governance framework that would apply leading practice in a consistent manner across the many different types of projects and programs of work that we deliver. And I'll touch upon some of those later on. So you'll see on the slide that the PMO at the moment has a number of functions as laid out on the image there. So portfolio management, business analysis, benefits and change management, financial and vendor management. We also have a function in relation to RDM, which is our revenue delivery methodology. And again, I'll touch upon that later. And that's really all around ensuring the delivery of projects in that consistent manner and the quality and ensuring the quality of how we deliver. We also have a function or a service around post-project reviews where we're looking to take the lessons learned and feed them back into the next iteration of projects. And all of this then is enabled through our project support team, who are sort of the engine keeping all those project steerings and project boards and various governance structures moving. So the PMO branch, as I mentioned at the outset, is part of the ICT and logistics division, but I suppose it maintains an independent status, and this is important. So the PMO supports both the business and the ICT team members, acting as a facilitator and a mediator if conflict or issues arise. And that's really important and something that I think has set us up for success. So there are a number of different roles within the PMO. I'm going to focus today on our portfolio managers. So portfolio manager is assigned, as every project is kicked off and a business case is developed, we assign a portfolio manager. And that portfolio manager is in essence a facilitator, that independence piece that I mentioned earlier. And really the portfolio manager is there to support the development of the business case, and then through the delivery of the project, really to ensure the project stays on time, within budget, is delivering the expected benefits. The slide there just gives you a sense of the various tasks and responsibilities that the portfolio rep undertakes. And I think one of the key parts or requirements of that portfolio manager, outside of, I suppose, ensuring that the project is following those good practices that we have laid out in our delivery methodology, it's also that judgment and decision making, knowing when to raise issues, flag potential problems, and really, I suppose, support the project team in order for them to deliver on their goals. So then having a look at our key stakeholders, and the PMO in revenue has many key stakeholders, as you'll see outlined. So the revenue board, our management advisory committee, MAC, which is the heads of all divisions on the board, our IT executive, the revenue CIO. And in the diagram there, I've just outlined, I suppose, the role of the PMOs, and you can see the PMO really is involved at all levels. So at a steering group level, at a project board, program board. I also, in my role, sit on our IT executive. And in essence, we're there for the whole journey, supporting projects from outset to delivery. Our IT executive is our key IT governance body, and in essence, the sponsor of the PMO. So ITEX has specific responsibility for IT strategy and the identification, the approval, and the implementation of significant IT-enabled business projects. So we do have a tailored approach to project governance. So we use steering groups, project boards, and program boards. We also have on occasion used oversight groups to provide an additional layer of governance and decision-making at board level. Every project must pass through a series of governance gateways, and that ensures that funds are allocated sparingly until enough detail is available to ensure that the project is viable and will deliver significant business benefit for the organisation. So then, how are our programs and projects determined and prioritised? I suppose I should really start by saying a lot of what revenue does, revenue has to do. A lot of our projects are mandated, and they can derive from national legislation or EU legislation. However, we also have a number of strategies that feed into our overall project deliveries. So we have our revenue statement of strategy, which is a 3-year programme. Which sets out the strategic objectives for revenue. This is supported, as I mentioned earlier, by our ICT strategy. We have annual corporate priorities. We have our divisional plans. Then we also, in our role in the public sector, have public sector strategy. We have the civil service renewal plan. So there's lots of strategies, lots of priorities feeding in. And as you'll see there, in essence, our approach is an onion layer approach where we categorize our projects and our work. And the idea with the onion layer is that we protect the core, what's at the center. We have a significant number of online systems and services that we provide to taxpayers. So it's really important that we ensure those systems are maintained and continue to function in order for us to do our core business. As we move through the next number of layers, we have mandated projects, we have critical projects, and at the very outer layer is our strategic projects. And I suppose this is the layer that is most vulnerable if we do have challenges, be they budget challenges or be they, I suppose, unanticipated projects or work. And I'll touch upon that a little bit later, given the current environment that we're in. But in essence, with this onion layer approach, we're ensuring that we prioritize our investments, that we manage our budgets, and in essence, that we ensure that we deliver and realign our resources accordingly. So going into a little bit more detail on what those layers are. So at the core, as I said, that's the work required to enable revenue to conduct its core business and function. So collecting tax and obviously on the custom side, then the processing of import and export transactions. The challenge for us, I suppose, is, and for many organizations, there's always more work to be done than can be accommodated in any year. So setting the priorities, the right priorities across the portfolio is a really, really important part of our annual planning. We have, I suppose, to balance that day-to-day service that I've mentioned, along with then enhancements and our transformational projects that will move revenue further and enable revenue to deliver on its key goals. So we have to balance that with securing all our systems and services and ensuring the integrity and privacy of our customers' data. We have to maintain that high quality 24/7 service. We have to advance the modernization of our existing core applications. And also we need to refresh our technology stack on an ongoing basis. So looking across, I've talked about core or mandatory. I've referenced there those EU, OECD directives, the national legislation. Our critical projects are our sort of maintenance and enhancements. So this is the work in order to maintain those systems that I've talked about. And there's a significant amount of work at that level as we grow the number of systems and services that we have. They all have to be maintained. So that's always the challenge, trying to find that right balance. Innovation and shared services, again, revenue has been, I suppose, in the IT and business space for a long time at this stage. And we're always looking at new technologies, new ways of working. How can we improve our processes? How can we collaborate with government departments and agencies? So and also, not only how can we collaborate, but how can we provide services for other government agencies and departments. So again, we have work and projects at that layer. And then finally, as I mentioned, the strategic layer, which covers developments that enable us really to drive our own business agenda. Some of these are developed through what is a new initiative that I'll touch upon later, our project prioritization process. But in essence, that's how we determine and prioritize our projects. And once then we have set out our plan for the year, for the next couple of years, the revenue delivery method I talked about earlier, this is a comprehensive guide to really how we deliver our projects. This is something that we have built up over many years, and it provides our teams with proven processes, deliverables, and techniques to enable them to define what to do and how to do it. So broadly speaking, it covers areas like project delivery, but also service delivery from our own program management office. Our processes and the ways that we work are laid out, release management, financial management. So every aspect of our project is laid out there and a guide, and that's something that we invest significantly in to ensure that we not only maintain it, but we look to improve it. I'll talk later about some of the challenges maybe facing PMOs. I think it's fair to say our revenue delivery method has been built up over time, primarily on waterfall projects. We now have a number of agile projects that we are delivering and have delivered. So I suppose one of the challenges facing us is how do we build up a similar type of repository of ways of working for agile projects. So that's an area that we are continuing to focus on. And then once those projects are in train and in flight, it's important that we can report on them accurately. And when we think back to when we set up the PMO, and I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges for us was, really understanding where we were with the project and being able to objectively assess that and have data as opposed to that gut feel, I suppose. We typically have 20 to 25 projects or programs in flight at any one time. So it's really important that we can give visibility across the organization at the various levels as to how we are performing. Again, I mentioned that a lot of our projects are mandated, a lot of our deadlines are fixed. So we don't have the option to, if we run into challenges, we don't have the option to delay a project. So we, I suppose, need to make sure, and this is a key part for us, that we have visibility on where the projects are there any issues, are there any risks, and that we intervene early if there is any view of that. So you'll see there just some examples of, at a steering report level, what we report on, which would focus on, and I think Jackie mentioned earlier, the RAG status, look at issues, actions and decisions, earned value metrics, and particularly focusing on the schedule. The project board report is tailored a little differently. It has some of those core deliverables at a higher level, but also looks at the financial status as well in relation to the budget for the project. And again, we have reporting at our IT executive level, which rolls up those metrics at a project level and gives ITEX a view. I think one of the things to call out as well is, while we have those, I suppose, those KPIs that will give a view, the PMO also provide a view at that IT executive every month on the PMO view of the project. And this is really, I suppose, our opportunity to highlight if something isn't necessarily being reflected in the project metrics, but maybe it's an issue or it's a challenge or it's a risk that hasn't yet been addressed or needs to be flagged. So that's something that the PMO add beyond just, I suppose, the basics in the sense of reporting. So major programs and projects 2019 to 2021, I'll be honest, it was a little bit different than we had envisaged. So I suppose back in January 2019, we delivered PAYE modernisation. So this was the introduction of real-time reporting. It was the most significant reform of the PAYE system since 1960. And the objective really was that revenue employees and employers would have the most up-to-date, accurate information relating to their pay and tax deduction, and ensuring really that the right tax was paid at the right time. In March, then a couple of months later, another significant program of work that we had been working on since 2016 was our debt management system. And again, this system replaced our legacy system at the time, but it also fundamentally changed our whole approach to debt management. So complete re-engineering of business processes, introduced a lot of automation and huge benefits from that. From an external perspective, then it provided a more streamlined service to allow and support viable businesses with tax payment difficulties. So an online phased payment arrangement facility was provided as part of this. If you can cast your mind back pre-COVID times, leading up to January 2020, the focus of revenue, and I think really the focus of the country, was very much Brexit. We had extensive and detailed Brexit preparedness and contingency planning. We were actively engaging across all government departments and agencies. During 2019, we had processed about 1.7 million customs declarations through our systems. However, in anticipation of the expected rise, we had to carry out significant work to increase our systems capacity. And we'd anticipated that maybe that 1.7 would go to 20 million. COVID certainly had an impact on those numbers, and I think only recently we hit a new daily record of 330,000 transactions through our custom systems. So I suppose those three projects or programs of work might give you a sense of the variety to the type of work that we do. I suppose also that the scale of the projects and the programs that we deliver. And as we entered into 2020, as I said, the focus was very much on Brexit. And suddenly we came to March when the whole world changed. And revenue played a significant role in the delivery of critical government supports then to support affected businesses, employers and individuals. The two projects that I mentioned, the PAYE modernisation and debt management systems, at the time when we delivered those projects, the benefits we'd anticipated, I've called out a little bit, but actually those systems and those deliveries were crucial in our ability to respond very quickly to the measures that needed to be put in place to support businesses and to support employees. So we re-engineered our PAYE modernization system. We leveraged that payroll data that we were getting in real time to be able to pay out subsidies that would support employers and their employees. Similarly, with the debt management system, we were able to re-engineer that to create a debt warehouse, which would allow employers and businesses to park their debts as such and take that pressure off at a time of such uncertainty for the whole country. However, I suppose important to note, while COVID was happening and while we were delivering all of these support services and subsidy schemes, we still had to continue on with our preparations for Brexit. We had mandated projects, so we had the first delivery of our EU mandated programme of work, which is the Union Customs Code. We still had to maintain all our existing systems and services. So a huge amount going on, and I think the role of the PMO in supporting that and in enabling that was part of our ability to deliver. So how did we do it? We had to adapt, we had to change. We couldn't just take the processes and the ways of working that we had used up to that point. It just simply wouldn't work. The planning and the analysis and the setting out of requirements and all of those things that we do when we sit down to look at what we're going to deliver, we just couldn't do it in the same way. So we had to really, I suppose, we had to speed up, but also we had to speed up in a way without losing control, and we had to maintain strong corporate governance. So the slide here just gives you a sense of the various different groups we set up, and we set them up in an agile way, so stand-ups every day across each of those steering groups. We had a oversight group which had the full revenue board and a number of key people across the legislation, across the operational, the technical areas coming together on a weekly basis. We used Kanban to track all the work that we needed to do. We used a RAID log to really capture and collate all the issues, the actions, the decisions, have that consolidated view of the risks across the various areas. And I suppose I guess if I go on to the next slide, I suppose it worked. The slide here gives you a sense of the business outcomes that we delivered. Now the figures on the slide there are a little dated. They're back earlier this year, but we delivered on the temporary wage subsidy scheme, the employment wage subsidy scheme, the COVID restriction support scheme. We had the business resumption support scheme, debt warehousing. We also, as I said, Union Customs Code, the UK exit from the EU. So a lot of success, and I think our ability to respond, to be agile, was absolutely critical in enabling us to do that. So moving on to the results and the benefits of the PMO, and I've probably touched upon some of these, so I'm just going to go through them relatively quickly. Increased accuracy, so I talked about that, having that RAG status, understanding where our projects are in terms of schedule, budgets and resources. The visibility, really important that across the organisation we understand where we are, and that understanding with the data enables us to make better decisions, more informed decision making. The development of standards, I touched upon that with the revenue delivery methodology, and that's key, and it's really providing support as well. No more than other organizations at the moment, revenue is experiencing significant retirements, staff movement, all of those things. So we have a lot of new joiners, and joining in this environment, in a remote environment, is particularly difficult and challenging. So anything that can help and support teams and people understand their role and their responsibility in project delivery is absolutely critical. The Knowledge Hub, I suppose the PMO within revenue links in and engages with business areas across the organisation, and we're looking to share our knowledge and I suppose being at the centre and coordinating all of these projects gives us huge insights, and I suppose it gives us opportunity to learn. It gives us opportunity to evolve, and we're really keen to share that with other areas of the organisation, and also in a broader sense, we're involved in the public sector with various project management groups. Strategic alignment, so aligning our projects and our delivery priorities with corporate objectives. So again, I touched upon the strategies earlier, and then to drive change, so identify opportunities to drive organisational change and deliver added value. And just giving you a sense of some of the areas, and I'm not going to go through them all, but two of the key areas that I might talk about. We introduced a new project prioritisation process. And I suppose really what this was recognising was that because a lot of what we do, we have to do, it can be quite difficult to if your project isn't mandated, quite difficult to get onto that pipeline. So we introduced a new process which would capture and evaluate ideas from across revenue, and some of these were then developed into innovative IT solutions. It's a different process from our standard projects, so the proposals go through a number of different gateways. There's a lot of focus on what's the business problem or what's the business opportunity, and how might we make the situation better. So we carry out a lot of business analysis, looking at the as is, the to be, and even if the project and the proposal isn't successful coming through this initiative, there's huge value in actually those types of workshops and that type of engagement. It's also an opportunity as well for us to trial some of the things that we want to maybe change for our other projects. We have the opportunity on a smaller scale maybe to introduce new practices, new ways of working. The other piece that I want to touch upon that I feel that has really demonstrated our ability to drive organizational change is the work that we did in relation to strategy boards. So this arose from really a review of our project governance structure. So we're continuously looking at how we work and how we do things, and we took a step back and we looked at the project governance structures that we had in place, and we were really, I suppose, trying to determine, were they suitable, did they work, could we do it better, and as part of that conversation and part of that review, we fed into a wider discussion around corporate governance, and again looking at the corporate governance structures across the organisation, and I suppose the end result from all of that was the recognition that there was a gap in the sense of creating boards or creating structures that would enable and support the delivery of our strategy. So we have established strategy boards that align with our statement of strategy, which are initially tasked with ensuring delivery of our statement of strategy, but which will also in the future contribute into future statements of strategy and future corporate priorities. So that's something which stemmed initially from within the PMO, and which has resulted in significant change at a revenue level. So I'm just about to wrap up now here and talk a little bit around the challenges, the lessons learned, and I suppose the need for continuous evolvement. So some advice maybe around some of the potential challenges in setting up a PMO. Don't try to implement everything at once. That's, as I mentioned, we have a number of functions and services that we offer at the moment. They didn't happen overnight. We have built and added them over time, and we're continuously looking at those services and functions that we provide. Identify an area for immediate impact. For us, as I mentioned, earned metrics, understanding exactly where we were in relation to our projects was an area, it was a need. So we were addressing a need, and once you are addressing the need, then you can start to demonstrate your value. I think it's also important to understand, look, like with anything, with any change, there will be a level of resistance. But again, if you have early wins and if you can show the value, you really do get people on board. What we have found from project delivery perspective is co-management works best within the project team. So we have an ICT sponsor responsible for all ICT related elements of the project, and then we have a business sponsor responsible for all business elements. Change management and benefits realization needs to be front and center. This is absolutely critical. And as I said, there is a need for continuous involvement. or evolution within the PMO. The context and the environment in which we're working is always changing, so we need to adapt with it. And I suppose to ensure that the PMO continues to be viewed as a valuable part of the organisation, it is important to have, I suppose, any early PMO adopters as advocates. So when you're addressing business need, I think that makes that job much easier. Our independent status, I think, works very well for us, so that all areas of the organisation feel that they can come and talk to us and highlight any issues or lean on us for some support. And then I suppose the last part is around really communication of PMO's positive impact across the organisation. Okay, I'm conscious of time. I'm going to just wrap up here. Some of the current challenges, I've talked about Agile, the drive towards Agile, and I look, to be honest, I could probably talk about that all morning. There's benefits and there's value to Agile, but there's also challenges around its stakeholder understanding and buy-in. The hybrid approaches, documentation is one certainly for ourselves. Organizational change, the pace and the type of change that we're facing. Work at the future, what does that mean for the PMO? The hybrid model when it comes to working, we're all working remotely at the moment. What will the hybrid model look like? How will that impact on how we work and how we deliver? And again, how does the PMO adapt to that? And then finally, complexity. We've gone from digital, so I suppose taking a paper-based process and putting it online, to actually digital transformation projects, which are fundamentally changing how the business works. Real time. So again, this makes it makes everything a little bit more complex. And then change management of benefits with these digital transformation projects. The change management is greater because the change is greater. Obviously, the benefits are greater, but linking back in with the point around Agile, it can be difficult when you're not quite sure what you're delivering at the outset to identify the benefits at the outset, and how do you manage all of that? So I'm just going to wrap up now, and I suppose finish off on a quote from Dennis Wakely. I suppose our approach at the PMO is to expect the best, and I think that's really important. Plan for the worst, and I suppose prepare to be surprised. So that's it from myself. Thank you very much for your time and attention this morning.
Understanding of the evolving nature of the PMO and revenue, and certainly the challenges that were faced with the COVID pandemic and the type of supports that revenue had to put in place for the whole economy. So I think everybody's probably saying well done to you and your team, and it gives us a really fascinating insight into how the pandemic itself has been a usurper, or made us drive to innovation maybe quicker than maybe we had intended for all organizations. On that note, I'm going to hand over to Terence O'Donnell and Joe Peppard, who are going to take us through some very interesting insights on the case studies that they conducted on the 4 PMO finalists in the National Awards 2021 that give us PMO leadership insights from Ireland. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
First up, just to want to acknowledge the opening that Jackie made. This is a particularly relevant, specialised area that has come up on an ongoing basis since the chapter was developed back in 1996 or 97. In fact, the very first annual conference, believe it or not, the topic was PMOs, and that was over 20 years ago. So it comes in cycles and waves in terms of the popularity of this particular area. I also want to acknowledge, secondly, the 4 organisations that contribute greatly to myself and Joe's work in this area. I've been working this since I had black hair, and that wasn't today or yesterday. And the richness of the information that we received from all 4 teams has resulted in a huge amount of information that we're going to distill and feed back to the community with their permission over the next 3 to 6 months. We will be going back to the 4 companies. We give them a promise to go back and give them some insights across their own teams, because one of the themes that Cleo did talk about, and it's a reflection of all of the PMOs that are involved, is no static they never stood still, and they don't, and it regularly changes in terms of what they're trying to do because they're always aligning with the business. I also like to thank those who are on the call who were the network for years in this area. So there was an unwritten rule that if anybody had some requests around, anybody that does this, and at least once a month I would be getting a phone call, and I would just pass off. Well, talk to Jackie over there, she's doing that, or talk to Cleo there. So this is going to formalize that network. And I think that the PMOs that we talk to and those that I've known over the years, if they had this type of community of practice back in the day, they may have gotten through things a little quicker than the trial and error that a lot of us had to do over the years. So I'm really looking forward to the community of practice taking root now. So without further ado, and apologies for the technical glitches, maybe you move to the next slide and we'll talk through a little bit about some context point. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I added 1 or 2 slides of this type in there just to give people who know little or nothing about PMOs some background. But given the poll that Katrina shared a little earlier, most of those in the call are very much practitioners in this space, but the whole PMO world really developed probably more in the 60s, 70s, and certainly in the 80s. And as has been the case for lots of things in project management, the US military always have a hand in some developing techniques, and they were the first to put their officers in play when it comes to the project office space. And as I said, around the 50s, 60s, you found the PMO popped into play. Nobody questioned whether the P was project, program, or portfolio.
All right, we've just lost Terence there. So Joe, we might let you take over while we get him back.
Why don't we go directly to, it's about 3 slides later, to the research design, and let me take up from there. Just flick through, Katrina. Yeah, go here. So again, let me just give you some background to the research that myself and Terence conducted. We had undertaken some research to surveys back in October 2019, and then I was quite fortunate that, I suppose, well, not that COVID came along, but actually when we did a survey in May 2020, it actually gave us data that enabled us to compare I suppose the reality that PMOs were faced, because I think COVID really was a crunch time for many PMOs, and in a lot of organizations there was kind of a lot of questioning about the value that the kind of the PMO was actually bringing to the organization. And I think COVID really laid bare that the answer to that question, and what we did see in quite a few organizations was the demise of PMOs. So that's sort of some of the kind of the background that sort of has guided us as we have continued to do research. Myself and Terence have obviously been involved in this space in various guises over the years. So our research is not value neutral. We did conduct quite a kind of a detailed literature review prior to undertaking this case study research. And as Jackie mentioned, and Terence has also alluded to, what we did do was we identified these 4 kind of standout applicants for the 2021 PMI PMO award, and we thought it'd be as a backdrop to today's event, to the establishment of this kind of community of practice, to use these 4 organizations as maybe a source of learning. So what myself and Terence, with the permission of PMI, we conducted 4 kind of in-depth case studies, and that really entailed us speaking to between 4 and 5 individuals across multiple levels in these organizations. We did have an interview protocol in terms of the themes that we were looking to explore, but this was really just a guide, and really we were very open to hear the achievements and hear some of the issues and challenges, and perhaps cover some areas that perhaps we hadn't identified as being as important. We did record all the interviews, and we also transcribed them. And of course, then that enabled us then when we started analyzing the data. And for those of you that are on the call that maybe are doing masters in project management, what we did was we did axial coding. So we did within case coding. So within each of the 4 organizations, we coded the data. And then we did cross-case analysis. So we did some pattern matching. We did some explanation building. And again, for those doing, research degrees, we were cognizant of our, the epistemology and our ontology. So, we use kind of an interpretive methodology. So, essentially when we were conducting interviews, we were getting the interviewee's interpretation of particular events, particular situations, of particular things that happen, particular outcomes. And of course, as researchers, what we are doing is we are giving our interpretations of their interpretations. So you kind of need to bear that in mind, but there are techniques that you can use to maybe minimize maybe some of the biases that might come into the findings and the analysis. So we've also been through a process of validation, and indeed events like this, and when we feed back to the 4 organizations, that's part of the process of validation. So let's move on and look at some of the findings. So Terence, do you want to talk about some of the themes that we identified that seem to align with success?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Hopefully Storm Barra will not restrict my conversational points for the next while. But I think to the point about the richness of the analysis that we've unearthed as part of the discussions with the 4 teams, there was quite a large number of themes. So for this morning's call, we're only going to focus in on 3 or 4 of them. Otherwise, we'd be here until lunchtime, and we probably still would be able to share the wider findings that come out of it. But in terms of the higher level themes, as with projects, right? When you're looking at getting a successful PMO off the ground, or getting the PMO to move to the next level of importance and relevance in the organization, there's 2 key things I think it's clear. One is you need to be clear what the role and function of the PMO is. In other words, what's their services and what are they doing? And the second, and probably most important one, is that there needs to be support in the organization for the PMO. So it does have to be senior, it does have to be active, and the leadership team, whether it's at divisional level or corporate level or lower in the organization, there has to be that support and that active support for the PMO to be successful. It needs serious sponsorship. And for those who haven't yet put a PMO in place, there's no point in thinking about doing that unless you've identified the need for it, you can underpin it, and you have a strong sponsor that will work you and work the team through the initial stages. One thing that did pop out, which is the first point that we bolded here, which we'll talk about shortly, is the whole idea of, the wider dimensions that the PMOs that we talked to obviously had. So the 4 PMOs were very focused on managing the journey from the beginning to the end, whether the project was part of a program, whether it was operational improvement, whether it was portfolio based. It was every aspect before and after and during. So it cleared the decks at an organizational level. It made sure that the right people were on the teams. It was able to double check that there's realism in place in terms of the estimations involved. So the whole context of how the project was set up, run, and delivered. And that was as much to provide support for the project teams involved as it was to give governance to the organization and assurance that controls are in place to do it successfully. The autonomous nature and the independence, I think Cleo touched on it on her presentation, and it was obvious when we talked to all of the PMOs that there was a credibility that the PMOs in question brought to the table, and independence was one of the key things that popped out. In other words, the project teams and the sponsors and the organization receiving services saw the value of the PMO from their perspective. So it was never seen as a situation where the methodology police were turning up and you were being interrogated under bright lights by the project teams, and nor was it seen by the sponsors and those from a governance point of view that the PMO was there to be the teeth of the organization. It was much more sophisticated than that. And fairness and credibility. So there was an openness. All 4 PMOs fostered an openness of the various stakeholders, within a structured format to share what they were thinking. The changes, yes. So benefits management, benefits realization is one of Joe's favorite topics over the years. And we're going to end up talking about it again today, which is only right and fair. But the difference between the ones that we talked at this time round and, other ones that I've come across is, look, it was real. Sometimes, it's almost a mathematical thing. Oh, yes, we look at benefits and there's a benefits log and we do this, that, and the other, And in the case of these 4, actually, benefits, outcomes, business expectations, they all became the reference point. That's where they started, and supporting that journey with that as a starting point rather than as a by the way, as one of the big messages that came out of that. The attributes of the PMO lead. So we've termed it here the PMO lead, but some people, whether it's a PMO manager, whether it's the director of the PMO, the label didn't matter. And in fact, the people we talked to, that was actually very, very relevant for us, because most of the PMO leaders that we talked to in this particular area, and there was more than one in some cases, were very unassuming, right? They were none of them were on a power base, so it wasn't. Nobody that we talked to in the leadership role of PMO were looking at, adding a power base to their remit and therefore making it, authority orientated. They were very supportive, and I'm not a huge fan of some aspects of Agile, but the servant leadership mindset, in the best sense of the word, was an obvious point to come out. So they were looking at, how do we support the organization? How do we support the teams? And their whole raison d'etre was around that. A little different than the more traditional, line management, do as I say mindset, which I would have come across in PMO leaders back in the year ago. I don't think they qualify under that leadership nowadays, but that's a different issue entirely. Accountability, and Joe will talk about this, right? So people in all respects were held accountable for the business case. They were held accountable for the expectations being set on the benefits. They were held accountable for deliverables. Now, if things went wrong, it was much more of a collegiate world in the PMOs that we talked to, which again contributed to that openness and the independence. But make no mistake, the number of a couple of the CEOs and CIOs in particular who made it really clear, right? You're getting approval for this, and it's happening, and we're going to invest in it. But you know what? If it doesn't happen, there's a collectiveness in terms of responsibility. That's a very, very another very important message came out. There's another term that you mightn't expect to see here again, which emerged, and that's the whole idea of the conscience of the organization, right? So certainly, at least 3 of them had absolutely that mindset. They were the custodian, they were, the steward. They tacked the whole thing through, and management would bring the PMO in, to provide some insights in terms of what's happening. But at the same time, the same people were getting calls from the teams looking for advice and support. So that idea of independence and that conscience of the organization we're talking a bit about. The other one I'll highlight, which to get into, is the long-term vision. So the co-evolution of the work was involved, and so on and so forth. So those are the big picture themes. I'm just going to quickly talk about a few of them now. And go ahead, Jackie, or Christina, who's controlling that. Yeah, the managing the project's context. So we find this quite different in terms of what we would have come across before in terms of any traditional reviews of PMOs, which were very much look at which quadrant they fit in, what service are they doing, right? And what's the relative balance of the work involved. The PMOs in question here had a much more holistic perspective, end to end, looking through the lens of governance, sponsorship, the organization, and also looking through the lens of the requirements and needs for the projects and the project teams involved, right? Knowledge gap. So none of the PMOs stood still. So regularly they all facilitated sessions, not overly formal, by the way, but some of it is quite organic in terms of, look, where's the next program of work coming from? What are the expectations of the business? What's the prioritizations in the business? And that knowledge gap then yielded occasionally gaps. So, for example, business analysis and helping with the business case development, that was a weakness that one or two of the PMOs identified, right? And what ended up happening was they added a service to facilitate helping the teams through that, right? Before projects and business cases landed at the executive table for review and approval, there were some reality checks that were done with the PMO, in terms of assessing relevance of timing, costs, so project finance came into play, the relevance of bringing in some partners and vendors, how that was going to be done and managed. Again, the PMOs had spun up services to help the teams do that. And then there was ongoing training and mentoring, both for the teams and so on and so forth. So the whole context of the project, as opposed to this is what we do and this is what we don't do. There was no such thing as we don't do this, right? Much more of a holistic perspective around that. Again, Jackie, would you mind? Yes. So, as I already mentioned, benefits management, benefits realization, right? None of the PMOs were traditionally back into that triple constraint mindset, right? And customer satisfaction, very much gearing towards deliverables of projects. All of them focused on the outcomes of the organization. And some of the PMOs were corporate orientated. Some of them were divisional. So in the divisional scenario, the shift was very much, well, what's our strategy this year in the context of the major projects we've got to do? Prioritization was mentioned, I think, a little earlier. That was another process that was followed. But the whole reference point in terms of the mature PMOs in this particular instance was strategic and linked to what level in the organization the sponsoring organization was at. So at a corporate level, much more focused around what the strategic goals were. At a divisional level, and I want to talk about a divisional level, a couple of these companies were talking significant numbers in terms of the revenue expected. So very much geared around the business goals, outcomes, and so on and so forth. And then the PMO, in all four cases, in our view, was an integral cog in the business agenda, either helping the business set the agenda, or once the agenda emerged in terms of the business unit involved, the PMO then set about how to manage the context of their expectations around that one. Then I was planning, management, then I was tracking, as I mentioned a little earlier. People were called out on this. So what are we getting for this investment, right? And then people were held account as part of that. Big mindset shift, right? So the less mature PMOs, some of you will have come across them, right? I call them the police state, and effectively they rather than chaperone, they're effectively going to arrest you, put you to prison unless you follow certain forms being filled at certain times and so on and so forth. And I'm sure there's one or two folks on the call who are still involved with PMOs like that. I don't think there's a pill you can take, but I think over time, you need to try and move that organization to a different level because it's a different time set. Joe, you want to pop in with a couple of conversational points that came up in this sessions? Jackie?
Thanks, Terence. As I mentioned, and if you can move the slides on, Katrina, we transcribed all the interviews, and just what I'm going to share with you now, and also on a couple of other occasions during the presentation, and just some of the interview fragments. So this is one, some quotes in relation to benefits, and I think that the message, that we got was very, very clear. Benefits is tough. Benefits management is very, very difficult. And I think, there are a number of reasons that we've identified as why that is the case. And I'm sure those of you on the webinar that are engaging or trying to introduce benefits management will no doubt resonate with that comment that it's tough. And so, as I said, I'll park that in a moment as to why I think that is. But I think the organizations and a couple of the PMOs that really done this very well, one of the things they did, and of course it enables you to do, is that any changes in the project as it progresses, whether let's say in terms of scope, any changes are reflected in terms of the benefits. So will this change result in more benefits, for example, or will it result in less benefits? So we're going to change, we talk about scope creep. Scope creep may not necessarily be bad, for example, if we're going to get more benefits. So again, once you've got a kind of a mature benefits management process in place, it enables you to do things that are really beyond the possibilities of most PMOs that we have looked at. I think if you can move on another 2 slides, I think, because I think what we also found was that the critical role of the CEO and leadership team for the realization of benefits. And I think this is a kind of an interview fragment from one of the organizations that I think really illustrates the importance of the CEO in this case and driving a focus on benefits. Our CEO does make it very well understood that if the benefits don't accrue, then your credibility to bring back further business cases might be jeopardized. So essentially in this organization, when the project, let's say, officially ends, so we go live, we go through that kind of that shakedown period, as a sponsor, as a budget holder, you will be called back in front of the investment committee. And that might be 2 years, 3 years, depending, 5 years even. That depends on the nature of the investment, to demonstrate that investment has actually delivered on the expected business benefits and the expected business outcomes. And I think what that does is it sort of leads to a sort of a self-reinforcing behavior, because obviously you don't want to appear before the CEO and that forum and really show that maybe for that investment that the benefits actually weren't delivered. So that means you're going to want your business case to be an accurate reflection of what is possible. So therefore you're going to work very closely with the PMO in order to challenge the assumptions and really to set up that investment to succeed. Because obviously then that will reflect very, very positively on you as a funder or a budget holder. So I think we see the self-reinforcing nature if driven by the CEO and the leadership team. Next slide, Terence, you want to talk about the conscience for a moment?
Yeah, one of the themes that we highlighted, we talked about this morning, is the idea of the PMO acting as a conscience of the organization. Now, it's a rather strange concept, right? But the maturity and the development of the 4 PMOs, these would be labels that we saw when we talked to them both individually. And by the way, as Joe mentioned at the start, we talked to 4 or 5 different people to get different perspectives on it. We just didn't talk to the PMO manager. The autonomous nature of how they went about doing it, their independence in terms of navigating the line between oversight and support. All of them were trusted by the teams doing the work, as well as those who were involved in the governance piece. They built up credibility. I think that's a really important point. I think Cleo made the point a little earlier. You don't start by deciding I'm going to be all things to all people, right? At the end of the day, the first level of PMO is consistency, standardization, professionalism, repeatability, right? You do that. There's no getting away from that. And if you don't do that well now, don't even think about going to the next stage. You have to pay your dues, you earn your spurs, and that once you get the credibility, that's what they all started to move into an evolving, adding, bridge building mindset, And they also asked hard questions because now they have credibility for both from the sponsor and for the project teams. So that honest broker was something I didn't expect to see, but the 4 PMOs all had that because of the credibility built up. Jackie?
And again, just to share with you, just some of the fragments from the interviews, and I've just highlighted some words that I think resonate with this kind of this independent nature with this kind of notion of the PMO as the conscience of the organization, you know, where we want to be seen as neutral. We're their facilitators. You know, we don't make decisions, you know, whether or not the project is actually going to happen. We're there to support you, to facilitate and help. Okay, that's very much the mindsets within the PMOs that we talk to. I kind of gave you a sense of the way that these PMOs operated, but also indeed how they were viewed by the rest of the organization.
Yeah, and that leads to the last theme that was that emerged in terms of talking to them all, and that's the idea of the evolution of the PMO. A lot of people on the call will be very familiar with the idea of how a PMO should evolve, and whether it's a 2x2 Gartner model or some sort of other variation. But what might surprise you, and definitely was a learning from the review that we did on the 4 PMOs, was the word co. So the co-evolution. Looking at that screen, some of you are familiar with this type of stuff. You know, first up, most PMO starts off very much functional based, you know, consistency, repeatability, professionalism. We put the methodology and so on and so forth. Then you can find some PMOs who are moving more to a more purpose-oriented PMO, like Arvea, for example, major projects, you know, and they were very specialized and brought in lots of really, really good and interesting things around on that space. Others then moved into the organizational stuff and the business stuff, strategic stuff. So, and it's not, by the way, as linear as that we'll talk, as it looks like there. Joe will talk about that in a minute. But in terms of the code dimension, I mentioned the point that the PMOs in all 4 cases were an integral cog to the business, right? And there was 1 or 2 interesting conversations that we had. I won't mention who, but we did, well, how do you measure the PMO? What's your measures? Which KPIs? And 1 or 2 of them had measures that they checked regularly, but there was 1 or 2 who didn't have measures. I went, oh. And when we got behind that, the measures that those PMOs had were the success expected on the project portfolio. If the business didn't deliver, the PMO didn't deliver. And that was seen as you know, why would we measure anything different? You know, so that's a salient point, because again, some of you who are running PMOs, you have sort of KPIs and SLAs and you measure stuff. Look, these PMOs didn't measure stuff. You know, they were focusing on delivering benefits, future oriented, and then that whole continuous improvement piece. Becky?
I think you can just skip over the next 2 slides. They're just interview fragments, which really just emphasize what Terence has been talking about in terms of the co-evolution of the PMO, how it's kind of evolved, and it's not just evolved, but actually co-evolved with the business and what the business was looking to achieve. Because what we then wanted to try to do is to see if we could use our data in order to you know, build some sort of a model, some sort of a framework that could then be used by others in order to you know assess their own PMOs, maybe in a diagnostic mode, but kind of give a sense of you know the nature of kind of alignment and co-evolution within in the context of the wider organization. And again, what we've done is we've sort of mapped the orientation of the PMO. So on the supply side, we have, you know, kind of more or less the how, so the how of doing projects. And then on the demand side is kind of the what, so what it is that we're looking to achieve. And then the focus is very much around the kind of the operational and strategic. And if we look at the, you know, what the kind of the supply operational, so this is all about execution. So this is, you know, about, you know, improving project practice, introducing methodology, introducing standardization, metrics, tracking, introducing predictability. So that's all about, you know, executing on a project. Now, it may be the wrong project, but that's a whole other issue. It's just it's the main about our ability to deliver projects. So that the next set of kind of services, the next domain is resource management. This was then, you know, building you know, project and program management capability, maybe creating a shared service, the learning, you know, managing capacity. And I think what we're also seeing happen here now is in organizations are beginning to think about ecosystem development, as we recognize that, you know, increasingly we're dependent on external third parties. Then the business outcome realization, you know, that's the kind of the benefits management. It's benefit reviews. It's measuring and reporting on what has actually been achieved as a consequence of that investment being made and the project being executed. And then at the domain of portfolio management, that is all around managing and the governance around the investment decision, the prioritization of investments, and the you know, the assurance that goes on around the value that's ultimately delivered from investments that the organization makes in my kind of, I suppose, interest would be around on the technology space. So that's sort of the kind of the value management domains. And then actually, if you can go back to the previous slide, Katrina, I just want to kind of talk a little bit about the dominant routes, because as Terence said, you know, and I think we saw from Cleo, you know, the starting point is generally get the basics right. You know, standardization, predictability, get in place your metrics, your planning. And then what we saw then, again, from analyzing the data, then what the organization then tended to do is to move up then and address issues around resource management. So capacity management, for example, and then start to think about investment governance, start to think about prioritization and business case process before then finally looking at benefits. And I think I did mention earlier that I would just talk a little bit about why, you know, again, our data might help explain why benefits management and benefits realization is so difficult, is that you've got to do all of these domains and operate in all of these domains before you can start to think about benefits. So what we often see is a lot of companies, you know, put a lot of emphasis on firstly getting standardization methods in relation to project delivery. And then the next kind of logical step is, well, let's focus on benefits and benefits realization, benefits management, and really struggle with that. And I think what our data shows is, well, actually, you've got to address the issues around the kind of resource management, you know, around capacity, for example, but particularly you've got to address challenges around the business case, the investment process, because as I've already said, you know, you may be doing the wrong projects, but doing them very well. And therefore, that's obviously going to have a knock-on implication on the benefits that are actually achieved. So that, as I said, they were the dominant routes that we saw these four organizations pass through. And then just to kind of maybe just to finish off, we're just going to show you some initial ideas around alignment. So taking this model, we think there's kind of maybe four pathways to achieving alignment. The first is very much on the supply side. So that's, if you move the slides on, this is really around resource allocation. And this is really, really critical. So it's that link between resource management and project execution. Can you move the slides on, Katrina? Can you just to show that? Yes. So this is now focused. No, just move back. Yeah. So this is really the kind of the resource allocation. So that alignment between resource management and project execution. So if you don't have the right, you know, if you're not managing your capacity right, you're managing on the supplier side, that's going to have an impact on your ability to allocate resources to particular projects and programs. The kind of the second pathway is the kind of the capability realization. So at the end of the day, you know, executing on your project, delivering business outcomes, you know, it's all about either delivering in a new capability into the organization, or in some instances, it might be about delivering in a particular product. For example, that might be an asset, a building, for example, or it could indeed be a digital asset. But that's the second alignment piece. The third alignment piece is along that strategic spine between portfolio management and resource management. And this is kind of resource optimization. And I think that this is an area where I think increasing attention is going to be given to. You know, as organizations increasingly work with ecosystems, you know, external vendors and you know, other third-party suppliers, maybe in a SaaS model, getting the optimization of your resources right is going to be critical to the overall success of an investment and the overall success of a PMO. And then the final value optimization pathway to alignment is value optimization. And that's obviously, you know, the alignment between your kind of the portfolio management activities and the business outcome realization. So if you go on to the next slide, you kind of see those 4 pathways to alignment just overlaid on top of each other. Terence, do you just want to finish off by talking about, you know, some advice that we identified for anybody just getting started, and maybe for advice for those PMOs that maybe are already there that are looking to evolve?
Yeah, look, it's quite difficult to parse down all the takeaways, because there'll be so many of them coming out of this off the conveyor belt over time. But for those getting started, I already made the point, you need to be sure that the PMO is going to contribute to the organization at whatever level, divisional or corporate, and it needs management support, right? I think Cleo's point was well made earlier. You're not going to boil the ocean here. You've got to start with the basics. Joe's made the point as well. You need to put metrics in place. You need to put tools in place. Start small, build up. You have to build credibility. Without that, you're going to go nowhere. The co-evolution, the honest broker, the independence, the mix between support and custodianship, they're all relevant. I know most people on this call are already in PMO, so maybe the next slide is something that it might be more of a takeaway in this context. So if you go to the next slide, so advice for PMOs needing to evolve. We were very pleasantly surprised by the wealth and the learnings that the PMOs that we talked to had, right? And they were very conscious of what they needed to do to contribute to the organization, and that became their sort of mantra in terms of success. So if you don't know what you're doing right now, and we did a couple of surveys a few years back, and one of the questions that we asked was, does your leadership team, are they aware of the service you provide, yes or no? And very surprisingly, over 30% came back with the leadership team weren't sure what their PMO did. I nearly fell over, right? Feathers and all. The key point here is understand, do you know what your PMO does? Do your stakeholders know what to do? Do you have a mandate? What's the mandate? And then credibility, cadence, and a track record is the first step. There's no point in thinking about trying to become more relevant unless you have the basics right. Because if you're not solving pain points to the organization, right, you're not seen as relevant. And a lot of PMOs during the pandemic, we had a presentation before, they were furloughed and have not returned because they were not relevant. So you have to shift the focus to support the business goals and become relevant in whatever capacity that means. It doesn't mean you have to jump up to be strategic. It might you just stay in the first bracket, but do it well. The takeaways then, last slide, Jackie, and Joe, you want to pop into this one?
Yeah. Just quickly run through some takeaways. The destiny of a project or program is determined long before the project kicks off. It's about making the right investments, and it's about setting up the investment or the project for success. And this is where obviously the PMO, the best PMOs manage the project contexts. I think that's really, really important. And I think, accountability for, with the project managers and the project sponsors, they're actually to deliver the project. And the PMO is kind of managing that project context. They lead with a strategy and change mandate. And I think you kind of got a sense of that from Cleo and the Revenue Commissioner's PMO. They're sort of morphing into now where some companies may have set up a kind of in addition to a PMO, a digital transformation office. Really your PMO is that kind of that transformation office. They do provide assurance for the business outcomes, and this is part of the conscience of the organization. Have we actually delivered what it is that we said we're going to deliver, and also then to the conscience around the kind of that honest broker. That's somebody that's sitting there that's sort of is prepared to to call things out, to highlight that this doesn't sound right. Challenging assumptions. I think again what we saw was outside of the PMO, more in the organization, the culture of the organization, the business leaders must be held account for project outcomes. And again, that seems to lead to kind of a circular effect. That means that business cases are recognized as being important. They need to be accurate. And this is where the PMO can really help and help the investment to succeed, because people are going to be held account. And as we said, we kind of, again, Cleo made very, very, very clear, and again, this came out from the data, that that PMOs do co-evolve over time. That it's about avoiding stagnation and complacency. That if people feel, well, now we know how to do projects and do them well, we don't now need a PMO. I think that's the danger that I think all of the PMOs that we talked to were aware that this could happen. That their success could actually lead to their demise, and we're conscious that they didn't want the PMOs to go this way. So I think, Terence, that's a quick snapshot.
Yeah, we could talk for a lot longer, but Jackie, we think we better hand it back to you, because there's a few questions probably that you want to try and get to before we finish.
An incredible piece of research, and it certainly is very insightful in terms of what the 4 PMOs are doing and the themes across all of them. Katrina, you might actually, I know you've been starring the questions as you've gone along. Would you like to throw out a few to the panel and see where we might get with them in the few minutes we have remaining?
Yeah, absolutely. And just a note to our attendees, if you can stay with us for a couple of minutes, we did get quite a few questions, and it would be great. So we're going to try and go through a few of them. We'll take another 5 minutes to do that. If you can't stay with us, you can watch the recording back in a couple of days. We will send a note out to everyone who's attended. So yeah, so guys, we've got a lot of questions from people, and some of them are definitely going to be takeaways, and I will start popping them up on screen. So this one from Sean. He's interested in approaches for resource management, so capability and capacity. When a new PMO is covering multiple business functions, and he's interested to know how you establish what resources are working on what and where. I mean, essentially, we're talking about resource utilization and capacity management here. So I might pose that question maybe to you, Jackie, first off.
Okay, that's fine. So from my perspective, I mean, getting under the detail, if it's a new PMO covering multiple business functions, this is where you need to lay the groundwork and actually figure out what projects and what they're working on and who the resources are, but more importantly, what their skill set is. So in other words, you want to make sure that if you've got an overabundance of projects for a particular skill, that will be a flag to you in terms of how to fill that gap. I think, if you're doing this, paper-based, it's very difficult. I think if you have some kind of tool that can help you do that, and I'm not going to recommend one because it can be different for every organization, but in the PPM tool space, look at the Gartner quadrant. There's lots of things that will let you do this, but it is absolutely key to start from the ground up if it's a new PMO, because you need, and I've done this process, you need to get control of the horses that are out of control basically, and understand what your resources are doing, and more importantly, are they doing the right things? Because the question really out of this is, we're doing loads of projects, we're probably over capacity, we've an over capacity issue. So which ones are the things we should be focused on? That's what will come out of your conversation, Sean. Anybody else in the panel like to add to that question?
Yeah, look, I think there's two angles you have to have here. One is demand and supply. A lot of the PMOs that are providing resources and providing the team to do that, they tend to focus on the supply side. Without a view of the demand, Sean, you're nowhere. Yeah. And the other point about that is, once you start to focus on covering demand, you need to have a resource planning element to the organization, whether that's in the project side or wider, depending on what you're doing, and tracking that on an ongoing basis, so that if there's a request comes in on the demand side, that you know what that means on the supply side. And that also then dictates whether you have vendor strategies in terms of bringing people in or not. So there's a whole raft of things. It's one of the more popular things that I'm seeing in PMOs of late as a service, that they're doing ongoing capacity planning, resource planning. And then the only other one to be careful about there is sometimes there's a difference between capacity and capability. So capability is future oriented. You mightn't have it, but it's a service that I'm now seeing more and more as an element of what the PMO are doing.
And I think just to highlight in the model that we presented at the end, that this whole area of resource optimization I think is all about getting to the nub of that question.
Thank you, Guy. I mean, it's very topical for sure, because you spoke a lot about benefits realization, which I think is the end result. It's the thing that will keep your PMO alive. But along the way, there's an awful lot of, I sometimes refer to it as hidden effort. And I think, Terence, you spoke about getting that balance wrong, where we know lots of PMOs where the balance is struck to the reporting and, analyzing minute bits of detail, but they've taken the eye off the benefits realization. So it's definitely, there's quite a few questions along that theme, and I think that there's a reason for that, because we're getting asked for it, but ultimately we're probably getting asked to show benefits. So Cleo, this one is for you, actually. This was on the topic of lessons learned, which I think all of us probably have in our capacity. So if you could maybe pick one or two highlights, is there anything that you wish you'd done differently, or would you have changed your approach, or anything that you switched out maybe in the middle?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because I think, as you said, we've evolved over time. I think we started with the fundamentals and the basics, and I think, again, probably recognizing the revenue PMO was in place since 2006. I took over the role about 4 years ago. I think what I've learned in a sense is, if you're trying to do something different, you need to take a step back. I suppose, look at what you're doing. Is it adding value? It's one of the challenges I put to people when they join the team. Challenge what we're doing. Is it right? Does it make sense to you? So we're not doing things just for the sake of things or because we always did them. I think when we're looking to introduce something new or do something differently, I think we have to be really clear, why are we changing? What's the value? We do trial things, and if they don't work, they don't work. I suppose an area that and it's a challenge I haven't touched upon is, like, one of the next things we need to look at is around project costs and total cost of ownership. And as we shift to the cloud, it's a very different model. And total cost of ownership is something that we've been challenged with, trying to attribute costs on a project by project basis, because we have a lot of shared infrastructure and software and things like that. I think, like anything, my advice on this would be incremental. Don't try and maybe implement something at once. If it's difficult, if it's not something that's going to be easy to do, start off small. Don't look to perfect it first time round, and then build and iterate. And that's something that I found has worked really well for us.
I think that's a great answer. And I think at the outset there, when you mentioned that it's evolving, it is something that evolves, and we probably all need to be, we've spoken about this before, there's big fear about stopping a project and saying, this isn't working out, we're not getting the benefits. And the PMO maybe has an advantage there, because you don't have to stop a PMO, you just evolve, essentially. If something didn't work, you try something different. So it is, it's a constantly changing environment, I think. There's a lot of questions in here. I'm going to, maybe to a question for Joe and Terence in this case, just to, hopefully you can see that coming up there. Technology has decided to fail me for a minute, so I shall tell you what the question is. So this is from Sean, and there you go. He's interested on your approaches to capacity management, how to visualize what the resources are working on, and allowing dynamic management. So, and I guess I'm raising this because there's a view around management, and I think, Jackie, you even may have popped a question back into the chat earlier to ask people what PPM tools that they're using. I think that may be where it's touching off of. But Joe and Terence, your tips maybe, or if you've got one or two key tips.
Yeah, look, when you boil this, back down to basics, when it comes to resource management, what you do need to do is differentiate the core resources that you are going to use in terms of the project portfolio. I'm not saying go down to the nth degree, but you need to come up with the pots of resources that are going to be used continually, and maybe then have a sort of an extra pot for some special items and so on and so forth. But that's the first thing. You have to define your resource pool. And the next thing, ideally, maybe not right away, because I've seen organizations try and do too much first up. But the second point that you will do maybe a little down the line is differentiate within each pool the level of seniority. So, even the PMs, senior PMs, middle of the road juniors. So you need to have a very clear understanding of what the resource pool is, and differentiate within the resource pool on skill sets and level of capability, right? After that, you then need to track your current project portfolio, right? That means believe it or not, folks, a timesheet system. Now, as someone scarred and pushing back on this, and I'd be interested actually, Cleo, if you have that in revenue, and I know the other guys, you have to track the time. You can put any system you like in there, and it's going to look wonderful, and but you're making it up as you go along. So then you're into tool sets, maybe even Jira if you're in the agile world, and even manual systems, just pure timesheet systems. You have to allocate that out from a practical point of view, Sean. That has to be done on an ongoing basis. And then you keep a current check on the level of resources for the commitments. Very similarly, when it comes to then looking at adding to the portfolio, that demand understanding, there are standard tools you should use from an estimating point of view. If you subscribe to the PMI, budgetary estimates or a progressive estimate, you make a call on how many you need, right? When do you need them? Roughly. You don't have to be perfect, and you then layer that into your already committed capacity, and then there's an X minus Y, right? You can visualize that in a lovely little spreadsheet. You can visualize that in some sort of little wonderful tool, right? So from a practical perspective, it's straightforward, but simple in a sense. Define your pool, differentiate your pool, skill size wise, differentiate your pool seniority wise, and then track what you're doing, right? Most organizations, you're going to be doing this for 2 or 3 months if you don't have it, so you get it tracked. And then you can go X minus Y. Joe?
Terence, could I just add something there? Like, it's interesting you meant the timesheet piece, because I think from an investment perspective, particularly if you're in a new startup situation, what organizations, when you're doing any kind of capital investment, you can usually offset the resources you have working on the project against the capital investment. And that's quite often a miss when you start out in the PMO and then the senior management kind of identify a gap in the P&L. And it's usually because we haven't done the timesheet bit, but we also haven't actually fed it into being able to, offset it against the economic life of the project. So that's really, really important, which is why the timesheets leads to the investment, which leads to return on investment and tracking the benefits.
Thanks, Jackie. There's actually quite a few. We've covered off a lot of the topics here. My next question is probably for Jackie, is maybe a kind of a sum up. This is the launch of the PMO Community of Practice. Do you have any kind of any as to future topics that because I know you're lining up a number of events for next year. So is there any areas that you would like to focus on, or is there anything that you want the audience to do in terms of coming across with their pain points and their ideas?
Thanks, Katrina. So from my perspective, guys, I could build out a whole panel of 9 events next year on the things that I'd like to discuss, because I've been around this domain for a long time with Terence and the guys. So, I think there's a fertile, amount of information we could discuss, but it's not my community of practice, it's you guys' community of practice. So one of the things, and I think I outlined in the start, and the objectives of the community of practice, what the deliverables would be, some of the topics we might consider, but again, this is about the voice of the customer. So in terms of, coming back to you, Katrina follows up with an email post-event. We might do a small survey in that, in actually asking you, are you okay for us to contact you, so that we can survey you on the kind of topics you'd like to see and feed that into the whole kind of community of practice, and how we roll it out over next year. I've already allocated slots in the calendar next year, so as soon as we start getting that feedback, we'll put it in. Some of the ones that I think are interesting I certainly would like to see some of the other PMO finalists present. I certainly I'm a judge in the PMO Global Awards or the PMO Global Alliance. There's some fascinating case studies at an international level. I've already secured one of those speakers for an event next year. The questions I'm continually asked are, what about certifications? If I'm starting in the PMO space, so there are a number of organizations we certainly don't subscribe to any outside organization. I know PMI are doing some development in this space, which myself and Terence are hopefully going to be involved in, but we really would like to hear from you. So when Katrina reaches out, it will be to get your consent so we can contact you about a survey about what you'd like to see. From my perspective, this has been an event that has been a long time in the making. I can't tell you how excited I am that, all those phone calls myself and Terence have had over the years, and I've had with other people to learn and to share knowledge, that we're now going to hopefully have this real community of practice to do that. In summary, I think I'm excited about what I've seen this morning. It's a brilliant attendance for a breakfast meeting. So thank you all for attending. And I suppose the three things that really, there was four things that came out for me, which was, I love the servant leadership, absolutely, without a doubt. You have to be servicing the organization. The accountability for the business outcomes, absolutely key if the PMO is to be a success. But the underpinning for me is the conscience and the co-evolution of the PMO. So you have to be the conscience of the organization. You have to be brave enough to stand up and say, ask the critical hard question, and then you have to co-evolute with the business strategy and the organization. So I think we're in a good place going forward, and I can't thank you enough for attending this morning. It's been a great turnout, and thank you so much to our speakers and to Joe and Terence for the great research, which I'm sure we're going to see throughout the events in the PMO community over the next year.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie.
Cleo, Joe and Terence, thank you very much. I just want to echo what Jackie said there. There's over 100 people joining us this morning for an early start, effectively in the middle of Storm Barra, and probably when a lot of you are accidentally homeschooling today. So, this is clearly a topic that's of great interest to all of us. And as Jackie said, there'll be a number of PMO Community of Practice events sprinkled throughout 2022. So I will be in touch, looking to get your permission first, and then your feedback and your input into what topics you want to see covered. And maybe you might want to reach out to Jackie if you have an interesting study that you might want to.
Happy to share my email, my PMI email in that communication, Katrina.
Absolutely. So it just remains for me to thank everyone who's joined us. Really appreciate Cleo, Joe, Terence and Jackie for joining us today, making it a very packed event. And thanks to all of our attendees and for all of your comments and questions. So good morning. I hope you get a chance now to get your second cup of coffee of the day. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Katrina.
Thanks, Katrina.
Thanks.